I'm Elena, 32, female, and my sister clapped after my dad slapped me in front of 60 people because I wouldn't give her my cabin. That single, sharp sound of her hands coming together in applause was louder than the slap itself. It was the sound of a final door slamming shut on any hope I had left for the family I was born into. It was the end of a long, painful story, and the beginning of a new one I never thought I'd have the strength to write. The story, like most deep-seated family rot, is about property. Specifically, a cabin nestled in 2 acres of pine forest, about 3 hours from the city. It wasn't just a building, it was my grandfather's soul rendered in timber and stone. My maternal grandfather, a man who smelled of sawdust and quiet dignity, built it with his own 2 hands. He taught me how to find the North Star from the porch swing and how to identify birds by their song. When he passed away 5 years ago, his will was simple and clear. The cabin, the land, and everything on it belonged to me, and me alone. The moment the lawyer read that clause, I felt two things simultaneously: the warmth of my grandfather's enduring love, and the immediate, chilling drop in temperature from my side of the family. My mother had passed years before my grandfather, and with her gone, my father, Richard, and my younger sister, Chloe, seemed to view me as a satellite that had drifted out of its proper orbit. Chloe, 3 years my junior, has always been the sun in our family's small universe, and I, a moon who is only useful for reflecting her light. My father has always been her most ardent worshipper. The favoritism was a constant, low-grade hum in the background of my life. I remember when I was 10, I had spent an entire summer saving up my allowance for a telescope. I was fascinated by the stars. The day I finally bought it, I set it up in the backyard with meticulous care. Chloe, then 7, wanted to look through it immediately. I told her to be careful to not touch the lenses. She threw a tantrum and in her flailing knocked the entire thing over, cracking the main lens. When my dad came home, he didn't listen to my tearful explanation. He saw Chloe's scraped knee from the fall and my broken telescope. He told me I was selfish for not sharing my toys and grounded me for a week. Chloe got ice cream. Years later, when I was in high school, I wanted to take a summer course in drafting and design at the local community college. It cost a few $100s. My father said it was a waste of money on a boy's hobby. That same summer, he spent thousands on a purebred horse for Chloe to pursue her equestrian dreams, dreams that lasted exactly until the first time she had to clean out a stable. The horse was sold a year later at a loss, but the message was not. Her fleeting desires were investments. My budding passions were frivolous expenses. So when my grandfather left me the cabin, it wasn't just a building. It was the first time in my life someone had seen me, truly seen me, and given me something that was mine, with no strings attached. It was a validation that Chloe's golden child status and my father's biased judgment hadn't been the whole truth of my worth. Chloe, of course, saw it differently. She had married young, had 2 children, and embraced the role of the beleaguered matriarch who deserved the world because she was building a family. From the day the will was read, the cabin became her primary obsession. "It's just sitting there, Elena," she'd say over holiday dinners. "My kids would love a place to run around in the summer, you don't even use it that much." I did use it. I'm an architectural drafter, and the quiet solitude of the cabin was a perfect place to work remotely, free from the distractions of the city. I went there at least one weekend a month. It was my sanctuary. My father always backed her up. "Your sister has a family to think about, Elena," he'd say, his tone laced with disappointment. "A single woman like you doesn't need a whole house to herself. It's about legacy. It's about the grandchildren." My childless status, as they both began to call it, became the primary weapon against me. It was their justification, the moral high ground from which they could rain down judgment. They never asked about my life, my career, my happiness. They only saw a vacant womb and a vacant cabin, and they believed the two were connected. This long, simmering resentment was destined to boil over. The venue for the eruption turned out to be my father's 60th birthday party. He had rented a large, impersonal banquet hall, determined to make a grand statement about his life and successes. 60 people, family, old friends, former colleagues, were invited. I knew it would be an ordeal, but to not show up would have been a sin they'd never let me forget. So I put on a nice dress, wrapped a thoughtful gift, and walked into the lion's den, armed with nothing but a practiced, pleasant smell. The banquet hall buzzed with forced cheer. Round tables draped in white linen filled the room, a dance floor sat empty under a glittering disco ball, and a long buffet table steamed against the far wall. I felt a familiar pang of alienation as soon as I walked in. My father, Richard, stood near the entrance, holding court. He was accepting handshakes and backpats, his face flush with self-importance. When he saw me, his smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Elena, you made it," he said, his tone suggesting my attendance had been in question. He gave me a brief, stiff hug that felt more like a pat-down. He barely glanced at the gift I handed him before placing it on a growing pile without a word. Across the room, I spotted Chloe. She was orchestrating her two young children, a boy and a girl, like a general deploying troops. She'd send them to one relative for a cheek pinch, then call them back, only to direct them to another. She was wearing a dress that was a shade too bright, ensuring all eyes were on her. When she saw me, her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She waved me over. "Elena, you look nice," she said, her gaze sweeping over my simple but elegant navy blue dress. The unspoken addendum was, for someone who doesn't have the pressures I do, "I'm so glad you could tear yourself away from whatever it is you do." "It's Dad's big day. I wouldn't miss it," I replied, keeping my voice light. Her children, hyper on sugar and attention, ran circles around us. "Doesn't Auntie Elena look lonely, Mommy?" her son asked loudly. "She doesn't have any kids to bring to the party." Chloe knelt and shushed him, but with a theatrical wink to a nearby cousin. Now, sweetie, it's not polite to point out that Auntie Elena is all alone." The cousin chuckled. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck. This was Chloe's method, public humiliation disguised as maternal correction. I excused myself and went to the bar to get a glass of water, needing to put a physical distance between us before I said something I'd regret. For the next hour I drifted. I made small talk with distant aunts and uncles who asked the same intrusive questions. "Still single, clock's ticking, you know. Working hard, you should find a nice man to take care of you." Each question was a small paper cut, a reminder of how my life choices were viewed as deficiencies in their world. My father, meanwhile, was basking in the spotlight. He moved from table to table, his voice booming. I watched him interact with Chloe's husband, patting him on the back, laughing at his jokes, treating him like the son he'd always wanted. When he passed my table, he offered only a curt nod, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. It was a practiced, lifelong dismissal that I had become accustomed to, but it still stung. I tried to focus on the reason I was there, to honor my father on his milestone birthday. I tried to remember the rare good times, the flashes of a different man I'd seen when I was very young, before my mother's passing had seemed to harden him, to calcify his affections around Chloe. I thought of my grandfather. He had always told me, "Dignity is a shield you hold for yourself, Elena. Don't let them take it from you." I clung to that thought like a life raft. As dinner service wound down, the clinking of a fork against a glass signaled the beginning of the toasts. A few of my father's old friends went up, sharing funny anecdotes from their youth. Then, Chloe's husband gave a short, respectful speech. It was all pleasant, predictable, and polite. Then Chloe stood up, a champagne flute in her hand and a predatory glint in her eye. She walked toward the small, makeshift stage near the DJ booth. A hush fell over the room. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't going to be a simple toast. This was going to be an announcement. It was going to be an ambush. Chloe tapped the microphone, and a soft feedback squeal echoed through the hall. She smiled, a saccharine, practiced expression that I knew was reserved for when she was about to be her most cruel. "Hi everyone," she began, her voice sweet as poison. "For those who don't know me, I'm Chloe, Richard's youngest daughter. I just want to say how wonderful it is to see all of you here, celebrating my amazing dad." She paused, letting her eyes sweep the room before they landed directly on me. The smile on her face didn't waver. Dad has always taught us the importance of family, she continued, her voice gaining a righteous tremor. He taught us that family supports each other, that we share our burdens and our blessings. It's about creating a legacy, something that will last for generations. For our children and our children's children. She took a dramatic sip of her champagne. My hands, resting in my lap, clenched into fists. I could feel the eyes of people at nearby tables starting to shift towards me. They knew this was a performance, and they were waiting for the big reveal. Some people, Chloe said, her voice dripping with meaning, are blessed with more than they need. They are given great gifts, wonderful assets from the generations that came before. Her eyes were locked on mine now. There was no pretense left. And it's a real test of character what you do with those blessings. Do you hoard them for yourself, letting them collect dust? Or do you share them with the family that needs them? The family that is actively building that legacy Dad always talks about. The air was thick with unspoken words. The subtext was now just text. She was talking about the cabin. She was telling this entire room that I was a hoarder, a selfish creature standing in the way of her family's happiness. So I want to make a toast, she said, raising her glass high. To Dad, for teaching us the value of family, and to the hope that everyone in this family remembers that lesson soon. Because some of us have children who deserve to run in the grass and breathe fresh air, and it's a shame when beautiful family places go to waste. She finished, and a scattered, uncertain applause rippled through the room. My face was burning with humiliation. She had put me on trial in front of everyone I knew. I knew I couldn't let it stand. I had to say something. Dignity is a shield you hold for yourself. As Chloe walked back to her table, basking in what she clearly saw as a victory, I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my voice, when it came out, was surprisingly steady. I'd like to say something if I may, I said, my voice carrying across the quieted room. All heads turned to me. I saw a flash of anger in my father's eyes. I was ruining his perfect party. Chloe brings up a good point about legacy, I began, looking not at her but at the crowd. My grandfather, her mother's father, also believed in legacy. He built his cabin with his own hands and he loved it dearly. He left it to me with very specific, legally binding instructions. His legacy was his to define, and his wish was for me to have that cabin. I honor his wish and his memory by respecting his decision. I kept it short, direct, and devoid of emotion. I was not going to get into a public brawl. I was simply stating a fact. But my father was already on his feet, his face turning a deep, dangerous red. He strode towards my table. "That's enough, Elena," he hissed, his voice low but menacing. "You are making a scene. Your sister was making a beautiful point about family, and you are twisting it with your selfishness." "I am not being selfish, Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I am respecting Grandpa's will." "Your grandfather is gone," he boomed, all pretense of quiet anger gone. The entire room was dead silent, watching this unfold. "This is about the living. This is about your sister and her children, my grandchildren. What do you need a cabin for? You have no one." The words struck me like a physical blow. You have no one. It was the core of their entire argument, the rotten center of their belief system. My worth was tied to my marital and maternal status, and without a husband or a child, I was a zero. I was nothing. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "That is a horrible thing to say," I said, my voice trembling now. "And it has nothing to do with a legal document." "I don't care about the document," he shouted, stepping right in front of me. "I care about my family. You will show your sister some respect." "Respect is earned," I shot back, a surge of defiance cutting through my fear. "She lost mine when she put my inheritance up for public debate." And then it happened. His hand flew up, and before I could even process the movement, a searing pain exploded across my left cheek. The force of it snapped my head to the side. The room gasped as one. My father had slapped me. In the middle of his own birthday party, in front of 60 people, he had struck his daughter. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. The only sound was the ringing in my own ears. My cheek throbbed, a fiery testament to the rage and humiliation of the moment. I slowly turned my head back to face him, my eyes wide with a pain that went far deeper than my skin. He looked shocked at his own actions, his hand still slightly raised. And in that deafening silence, a new sound cut through the air. Clap, clap, clap. It was Chloe. She was standing by her table, a triumphant, vicious smile on her face, applauding. She was clapping for my humiliation. She was cheering for my pain. In that moment, she wasn't my sister. She was a monster. The sound of Chloe's clapping broke the spell. It was an act of such profound cruelty that it overshadowed everything else, even the sting of my father's hand on my face. The applause died as quickly as it started, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared, their faces. Mixture of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. My father looked from his hand to my face, a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe just surprise at his own loss of control in his eyes. But it vanished as soon as he saw Chloe's victorious expression. He straightened his tie, his jaw setting into a stubborn line. He had chosen his side. He always did. I stood there for a second longer, frozen. The world had gone fuzzy at the edges. My cheek burned, my heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind had become strangely, icily calm. It was the kind of clarity that comes only after the worst has happened. There was nothing left to fight for here, nothing left to save. Then Chloe was beside me, her voice a conspiratorial whisper in my ear, loud enough for those at the nearest tables to hear. "See," she murmured, her breath warm against my still burning cheek. "Dad agrees. Everyone agrees. This is what happens when you're stubborn. You don't need the cabin, you're childless. My family does. It's time to do the right thing and sign it over to me." Her words were so detached, so clinical. She saw the slap not as an act of violence, but as a negotiating tactic. A tool to get what she wanted. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and I saw a stranger. The little girl I had grown up with, the one I'd shared secrets and scraped knees with, was gone. In her place was this grasping, entitled woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. I didn't answer her. I didn't even look at my father again. I simply turned and walked away. My body moved on autopilot. I walked past the table of my stunned aunts and uncles. I walked past my father's friends, who now found their shoes incredibly interesting. I walked past the buffet table, the birthday cake with its 60 unlit candles, and the pile of gifts. Every step was a thunderclap in the silent room. I could feel 60 pairs of eyes on my back, a heavy cloak of shame and pity. Not a single person said a word. No one called out my name. No one stood up for me. In their silence, they were all complicit. The heavy door of the banquet hall closed behind me with a soft whoosh, cutting off the oppressive silence and leaving me in the relative quiet of the lobby. I kept walking, through the lobby, out the glass front doors, and into the cool night air. The parking lot was vast and empty. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably now. I got into my car and locked the doors. And then, the dam broke. A single, ragged sob escaped my lips, then another and another. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and cried. I cried for the little girl who was blamed for her broken telescope. I cried for the teenager whose dreams were dismissed. I cried for the woman who was just publicly assaulted and humiliated by her own family. I cried for the loss of a father and a sister I realized I never truly had. After a few minutes, the storm of tears subsided, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. "Dignity is a shield you hold for yourself." They had tried to take it from me. They had tried to break me down, to shame me into submission. But they had failed. They had only revealed their own ugliness. My hand stopped shaking. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over my contacts list. I knew who I had to call. There was only one person who would understand, one person my grandfather had trusted implicitly. I found the name, Marcus Thorne, our family lawyer, but more than that, he had been my grandfather's best friend for over 50 years. When the will was executed, Marcus had taken me aside. "Your grandfather was a wise man, Elena," he had said. "He loved you very much. He also knew your family. If they ever, and I mean ever, give you serious trouble over this cabin, you call me, day or night." I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. Marcus Thorne. His voice was calm and steady as always. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a choked half-sob came out. I couldn't form the words. The humiliation was still too raw. I tried again, but my throat was tight with unshed tears. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I thought he might hang up, thinking it was a wrong number. But then he spoke, and his voice was gentle, knowing. "Elena, is that you?" I managed a small, croaking sound of affirmation. "Say no more," he said, and the authority in his voice was instantly comforting. "I had a feeling this day would come. Where are you?" I told him the name of the banquet hall. "Don't go anywhere," he said. "I'm on my way." He didn't need the details. He didn't need the story. He knew. My grandfather had known. And in that moment, I understood that the cabin wasn't just a gift. It was a lifeboat my grandfather had built for me years ago, and Marcus was the one he had trusted with the map to find me when the storm finally hit. I didn't go back inside. I couldn't. Instead, I drove to a small, quiet park a few blocks away from the banquet hall and sat on a cold metal bench under a flickering lamppost. The night was calm, a stark contrast to the tempest raging inside me. I stared up at the stars, the same stars my grandfather taught me how to read from the porch of the cabin. For the first time, I felt a profound connection to his foresight. He hadn't just left me a house, he'd left me a fortress and an escape plan. He had known the character of his own son-in-law and granddaughter, and he had armed me for a battle he prayed would never come. I imagined the scene back at the party. My departure must have left a crater. I pictured Chloe and my father, perhaps initially flustered, quickly regrouping. They would spin the story, painting me as the hysterical, ungrateful daughter who caused a scene over nothing. They would twist my defense of my grandfather's will into an attack on their family values. By now, they were probably basking in the sympathy of their audience, the righteous victims of my instability. Their victory must have felt complete. It took Marcus about 30 minutes to arrive. I saw his sensible sedan pull into the hall's parking lot and watched as he got out. Marcus Thorne was in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair, a trim suit, and an air of unflappable competence. He carried a worn leather briefcase that I knew contained more than just papers. It contained legacies, secrets, and tonight justice. He wasn't invited to the party, which made his arrival all the more potent. He wasn't here as a guest. He was here as an officer of the will. I stayed on my bench, trusting him to handle what came next. As Marcus later recounted it to me, he walked into the banquet hall with quiet purpose. The party had tried to regain its footing. The DJ was playing soft music, but the atmosphere was strained. People were talking in hushed tones, casting nervous glances at my father and Chloe, who were huddled together at their table, projecting an image of wounded dignity. Marcus walked directly to them. His presence alone was enough to silence the nearest tables. People recognized him. He had been the executor of my grandparents' estate, a figure of solemn authority. "Richard, Chloe," Marcus said, his voice calm and professional. He didn't wish my father a happy birthday. He didn't acknowledge the party at all. "I need a word with you." My father, bolstered by the support he felt he had, bristled at the interruption. "Marcus, this is a private party. Whatever it is, it can wait until business hours." "I'm afraid it cannot," Marcus replied, his gaze unwavering. "I am here tonight not as a social caller but as the legal representative for Elena. I was just on the phone with her. An incident seems to have occurred." Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms. "Oh please, she called you. How dramatic. She had a little tantrum and ran out after she tried to ruin Dad's birthday." Marcus didn't even look at her. His focus remained entirely on my father. "Richard, I was informed that you physically struck your daughter, Elena, in front of this entire assembly. Is that accurate?" The directness of the question sucked the air out of the room. My father's face went from red to pale. "That is a family matter. It has nothing to do with you." On the contrary, Marcus said, placing his briefcase on an empty chair and clicking the latches open. It has everything to do with me, and with the will of a man we both respected. You see, he knew this might happen. He knew you, Richard. And he knew you, Chloe. He pulled out a single, crisp document from the briefcase. The room was now utterly silent. Even the DJ had cut the music. Everyone was leaning in, listening. Your father-in-law was a very careful man, Marcus said, his voice resonating with quiet power. He loved his family, all of them, but he was not blind to their natures. He wanted to ensure that his most precious gift, the cabin he built for his wife and treasured his entire life, would be a place of peace for his granddaughter Elena, not a source of conflict. He hoped you would all respect his final wishes. But he was also a realist. And so, he included a failsafe. Marcus held up the document for Richard and Chloe to see. It was a copy of a specific addendum from my grandfather's will. Though they couldn't read it from where they stood, its mere presence was ominous. Your father-in-law established two primary instruments in his estate plan, Marcus explained, his voice projecting clearly through the silent hall. The first was the direct inheritance of the cabin property to Elena. The second was a separate entity known as the Miller Family Trust. At the mention of the trust, I could picture Chloe's ears perking up. The Miller Family Trust was their safety net, a significant fund my grandfather had set up that provided a generous annual disbursement. It paid for Chloe's children's private school, their family vacations, down payment on their oversized house. It was the financial bedrock that allowed Chloe to maintain her lifestyle while constantly complaining about how hard she had it. My father, Richard, also received a stipend from it, supplementing his pension. I was a named beneficiary but had never taken a dime, wanting to make my own way. This trust, Marcus continued, was my grandfather's way of continuing to provide for the family. However, he attached a very specific, very strict condition to it. He called it the Peacekeeper Clause. Marcus put on a pair of reading glasses and read directly from the document. His voice was steady and clear, a judge delivering a final verdict. Addendum 4B, the Peacekeeper Clause. Let it be known that the primary function of the Miller Family Trust is to foster familial harmony. Therefore, should any named beneficiary of this trust, namely my son-in-law, Richard, or his direct descendants, be found to have engaged in any act intended to compel, coerce, intimidate, publicly shame, or apply physical force upon my granddaughter, Elena, with the goal of forcing her to relinquish, sign over, or otherwise forfeit her exclusive inheritance of the cabin property located at 124 Pine Ridge Road, then the Miller Family Trust shall be, at that moment, immediately and irrevocably dissolved. A collective gasp went through the room. Chloe's face had gone ashen. My father looked as if he'd been struck himself. Marcus wasn't finished. He let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing his reading. Upon said dissolution, the entirety of the trust's remaining capital and assets shall be liquidated and donated in full to a registered charity, or charities, to be selected at the sole discretion of my granddaughter, Elena. He lowered the paper and took off his glasses, his eyes finding my father's again. Tonight, Richard, you publicly shamed your daughter. You publicly demanded she give up her inheritance for the benefit of your other daughter. And then you physically assaulted her when she refused. Chloe, he said, turning his gaze to her for the first time, you not only participated in this public shaming with your toast, but you applauded the physical violence against your own sister and reiterated the demand immediately afterward. He gestured broadly to the 60 silent guests. The terms coercion, intimidation, public shaming, and physical force have all been met, and we have, by my count, 60 witnesses who can attest to it. The conditions of the Peacekeeper Clause have been unequivocally triggered. As of this moment, as the executor of the estate, I am legally obligated to inform you that the Miller Family Trust is dissolved. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of financial ruin, the silence of public disgrace. Chloe stared at Marcus, her mouth slightly agape, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. The triumphant smile she wore just an hour ago was gone, replaced by the stark terror of someone who had just gambled everything and lost. My father finally found his voice, a weak, sputtering rasp. "You can't do this, it's my money, my life." "It was never your money, Richard," Marcus stated calmly. "It was his, and it came with conditions. You broke the conditions, it's that simple. He gave you a choice. You could have his money, or you could try to bully his granddaughter out of her home. He just made sure you couldn't have both. He trusted you to make the right choice. You chose poorly." Chloe started to cry, not the performative tears of a victim, but the ugly, gulping sobs of a spoiled child whose favorite toy has just been broken. "My kids! Their school! What are we going to do?" she wailed at our father. Richard didn't answer. He just stared into the space where Marcus had stood, looking like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. The foundation of his world had crumbled in less than 5 minutes. The respect of his friends, the security of his finances, the moral high ground he so arrogantly occupied, all of it gone. Marcus packed the document back into his briefcase, the clicks of the latches echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. He gave one last look to my father. "Happy birthday, Richard," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Then he turned and walked out of the hall, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 lives that had been dismantled by their own greed and cruelty. I saw Marcus's car pull out of the lot and drive toward the park. He parked behind me and walked over to my bench, his expression gentle. He didn't say, "I told you so," or anything of the sort. He just sat beside me, a quiet, solid presence in the dark. "It's done," he said softly. "The trust is dissolved. Your grandfather's wishes will be carried out." Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a profound, aching love for the grandfather who had protected me even from beyond the grave. "He knew," I whispered. "He really knew." "He knew you had a gentle heart, Elena," Marcus said. "And he worried that others would see it as a weakness to be exploited. He wanted to make sure you were holding an iron shield, even if it was disguised as a wooden cabin." In the weeks that followed, my phone buzzed with frantic, desperate calls and texts from Richard and Chloe. They went through the 5 stages of grief in rapid succession. First, denial. "Marcus is wrong, this can't be legal." Then anger. "How could you do this to us, to your own family?" Then bargaining. "If you just tell Marcus you were lying, we can fix this. We'll let you keep the cabin, we promise." Then depression, which mostly manifested as long, rambling voicemails from my father about how his life was over. They never reached acceptance. And they never, not once, apologized. They weren't sorry for what they did, they were sorry they got caught, they were sorry there were consequences. With Marcus's help, I changed my phone number. I blocked them on all social media. I sent one final, formal email, drafted by Marcus, stating that all future communication must go through his office. I was building a wall, not out of spite, but for survival. A month after the disastrous birthday party, I drove up to the cabin. It was a crisp autumn day, and the leaves on the trees lining the long, gravel driveway were brilliant shades of red and gold. As I stepped out of the car, the scent of pine and damp earth filled the air. It smelled like peace. It smelled like home. I walked onto the wide porch and sat on the swing, the same one my grandfather and I had spent countless hours on. For the first time, there was no shadow looming over it. There was no nagging voice in the back of my head telling me I didn't deserve it, no sense of impending conflict. The cabin was finally, completely mine. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of possibility. A few days later, Marcus called to tell me the final assets from the dissolved trust had been calculated. It was a substantial sum. He asked if I had given any thought to the charity I would select. I had. I chose a national foundation that provides support and shelter for victims of domestic abuse and their children. I filled out the paperwork, and in the donation in memory of section, I wrote my grandfather's name. It felt right. His legacy wasn't just in the wood and stone of the cabin, it was in this final act of turning my family's ugliness into a force for good, providing a safe haven for others who needed to escape their own storms. My life is quieter now, but it's a good quiet. I lost a father and a sister that night, but perhaps I never really had them to begin with. What I gained was far more valuable, myself. I found a strength I didn't know I possessed, a resilience forged in the fire of public humiliation and private betrayal. I have my work, I have my peace, and I have my sanctuary in the woods, a legacy of a love that was real and unconditional. So now I have to ask you, the listener, what would you have done? Would you have given in to the pressure for the sake of a hollow family peace? Or would you have made that silent call, trusting that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest, but about knowing when to let the consequences speak for themselves?